Why did Albert Einstein, a Jew, try to warn all of us years before JFK was assassinated that the greatest threat to the United States of America was extreme Zionist groups within Israel? Einstein's letter warning all of us has been largely ignored by history, redacted, if you will. It's been hidden. But JFK paid attention to this. He knew that Einstein was correct. And we know that JFK and RFK had a secret battle against Zionist extremism that's largely been covered up by history. Why is that? Hidden. So it's time to get a little uncomfortable today on the show, looking at the assassination of JFK and RFK and their secret battle against Zionist extremism that most people have no idea even exists. Today I'm joined by Ken McCarthy. He's the man who spent countless time and effort researching this, perhaps more than anyone else. His newest book is called JFK and RFK's Secret Battle Against Zionist Extremism. I have it here. It's an excellent read. Ken, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to go through what's amazing about this book is, this isn't speculation. From a historical perspective, the countless, you can see my dog ears here, but just like countless real world documents that you've got in the book, letters from JFK to his father, all sorts of historical evidence in this book. I guess before we get into all of the details, how did you come to this research? How did you discover this sort of redacted history of all of this?
Well, like many people, I'm an avid reader of JFK assassination material, and I've always been a consumer. It never occurred to me to be a producer because there's so much of it, right?
Right.
And I tend to focus on current events. But I was watching a YouTube video, and the fellow on there was talking, Richard Medhurst, by the way, was talking about a plan to use atomic bombs to build a canal from the Red Sea through Israel to the Mediterranean. And I thought, that's some crazy stuff. And then when I saw the date, I said, wait a minute, that was the Kennedy era. President Kennedy never would have gone for that. So then I did a search, and I looked up Kennedy, Israel, nuclear weapons. And if you do that search, you will find out that, in fact, John F. Kennedy was very concerned about Israel developing nuclear weapons. And not just a little concerned, he actually wrote it. It's in the book. We've got the telegram. Basically told the prime minister at the time, if you don't let us get in there and inspect your nuclear plant, we may cut off aid from you. So this was a serious diplomatic thing going on. Now, these documents were classified until relatively recently. So these are telegrams, cables, letters, and they were not for public view.
It is remarkable. And of course, we now know that Eisenhower warned JFK as he was handing over the presidency to him about Israel's nuclear ambitions. It seemed he already knew that they were in development. So basically, didn't he say, don't let them lie to you about what they're doing?
Yeah, and that's what they were doing. They were concealing what they were doing. They were lying about what they were doing. They said it was a water desalination plant. They said it was just for research, et cetera, et cetera. And the CIA knew that something was going on, and that information got passed to JFK. And he contacted Israel and said, we got to send inspectors now. And Israel delayed and delayed and delayed. They even switched prime ministers out. And they had a new one come in. And then, as you know, in negotiations, now you got to start all over from scratch with the new guy. This was going on in the summer of 1963. And as we all know, John F. Kennedy was murdered in November of 1963. And when he was out of the way, LBJ was very happy to let the Israelis develop nuclear weapons. He didn't want to press it. He didn't want to, ruffle feathers with them for, reasons we could actually get into. And then they, in fact, got nuclear weapons. And some of the material they got for those weapons came from the United States. It was stolen from a plant in Western Pennsylvania, strangely not far from where they almost shot Trump, but that's just historical trivia.
Wait.
Just 20 miles away.
Sorry. Wait, mate, go back. I'm sorry.
Okay, I know the world is an amazing place. So there was a nuclear processing plant, uranium processing plant in western Pennsylvania, and it was operating contractually through the Navy. So it was the Navy's deal, but there was a private contractor running it. And that fellow happened to be an ardent Zionist. And over 200 kilos of weapons grade material went missing from that plant. And that material is believed to have ended up in Israel's nuclear weapons program.
Wow. I've
Yeah, well,
never heard that
yeah, I
part
mean,
of the
that when
story.
once, and this is, I got to tell you, I have consumed a lot of JFK material since I was 10. I started reading it actually, and I've never heard anybody talk about any of this. And I'm beginning to wonder, I don't want to cast aspersions, but I'm beginning to wonder if possibly the assassination research community has been told, don't mention Israel. Because when you start looking at all the intersections of Israel and the assassination of Kennedy, there's a lot of them. And I just don't understand how this could, none of this stuff could be in public vision up until
Well,
this
let's walk
point.
through. I
Yeah,
mean, that's a good place to go. I mean, let's walk
yeah.
through some of those indicators, those connections, if you will. And I agree with you. I think it's been actually totally covered up. We're all told to, just look at the CIA, look at the mob,
Right.
totally ignore the Israel side of this entire story, which is massive. And
Yeah.
when you understand the documents, the hidden documents, and what JFK was actively fighting against with Israel and the Zionists in Israel, it was explosive.
Well, let's look at the guy that replaced JFK, LBJ. A lot of people don't know that he came from a Christian Zionist family. His aunt Jessie Johnson and his grandfather belonged to a, I'm just going to call them a cult called the Christadelphians. And they believed that Jesus can't come back until the Jews have their own kingdom. Now, interestingly enough, Judaism doesn't believe that, but these people did believe that, and they also believe that if Israel is destroyed, the world will be destroyed. So this is the family that LBJ grew up in.
Is that similar to what Senator Ted Cruz believes?
It's there's a lot of them out there. They're called Christian Zionists, and I'd like to ask them, where in the Bible did Jesus say we have to kill, maim, and starve children so that I can come back?
Right.
I'm not a theologian, but I've never heard of that in the Bible, and yet we have millions of
Yeah.
Americans who literally believe that, and they're a
Yeah, I
problem.
don't recall that from all of my
Yeah,
confirmation classes and every Sunday I'm sitting with my pastor. I don't ever recall that in the Bible, and I've read it.
I,
So
I
I
do
don't I don't
recall
I
him
don't
saying
quite.
this. He said, if you harm one child, it'd be better for you if they put a millstone around your neck and threw you in the ocean. Jesus said that. I remember
Hmm.
that from Sunday school. I don't remember this other stuff that these guys are going off on. But anyway, LBJ was raised in an ardent Christian Zionist family, and I'm going to call them wackos. I'm just, sorry to, step on anybody's religious beliefs, but I think it's kind of wacko. The other thing that we don't know much about, there was a guy named Bobby Baker, and people that kind of know that history know that Johnson, if you can see this in Life magazine, get the Life magazine before Kennedy was killed, the month before, and Johnson had a buddy called Bobby Baker. And Bobby Baker was, one of these, white collar criminals that was involved in all kinds of stuff. And they were positioning LBJ to be taken out, not by violence, but by scandal. And then, of course, the next month, Kennedy's dead and Johnson's president. Bobby Baker was connected to Meyer Lansky, one of the most brilliant criminal minds that ever existed. Um, but the other connection between Johnson and the Zionists was a woman named Matilda Krim. Uh, she was so close to Johnson that she and her husband had a bedroom in the White House. Like they visited that often. They visited the ranch often. They built their own place near the ranch so Johnson could visit them in his helicopter. She was a member of one of the one of the Zionist extremist groups, the Irgun. She assisted in smuggling weapons to Palestine against the law. Okay, then she became a scientist. And by the way, interestingly enough, she became a famous supporter of AIDS research. Fauci's realm. But in any event, Matilda Krim was extremely close to LBJ. When the 67 war took place, his wife was back on the ranch. Matilda Krim was in the White House in her own bedroom, presumably, and they conferred about what was going on. And she actually wrote a speech for him to deliver to the public about the 67 war. So LBJ was Zionist friendly, let's say. I think that's, as an understatement. He is also the man that said said basically, I know JFK was pushing to, get into the labs and get into the research facility. I'm going to go soft on that. And they got the nuclear weapons during the LBJ administration. There was another thing that the Kennedy brothers were working on in the summer of 63, which was they really wanted Israel to register as a foreign lobbyist, Israeli groups, lobbyist groups. And JFK tasked Robert Kennedy, who was Attorney General at the time, with making that happen. And of course, they were pushing back, delaying, making excuses, blah, 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 blah. Well, again, we have to remember that's the summer of 63, fall of 63, Kennedy's dead. Robert F. Kennedy is effectively neutered because, now LBJ is the president. And LBJ let all that lobbying go. And to this day, the various groups that are lobbying on behalf of the Israeli government are not registered with the State Department. This is the only country in the world. Right? England has to right? We were the only, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, but Israel still gets a pass on registering. These two things, nuclear weapons and the ability to bypass the foreign lobbying laws in the United States, are the pillars of the support that Israel gets from the United States. Also, Johnson was the first person to give offensive weapon systems to the Israelis. Nobody had done that before. And I think he 7x'd their military support. So we've been supporting them. I think Eisenhower sent some rifles. Kennedy sent some stuff, but it was defensive. It was Johnson that opened the floodgates. So there's a connection between, and as you know, Clayton, there are books, many books that say Johnson was behind the assassination, right? And I think that's probably not right, but he certainly had to be involved.
Right.
He had to,
people compartmentalize this, right? I mean, they'll sort of pick different pieces of this, but I think it's all. I mean, is it your estimation that it all is part of the story? The mafia connection. No.
Yeah, well, we've got the organized crime people, we've got the CIA people, we've got LBJ, and the one group that we never mention are their Zionist friends, and they were all of these groups. And let's go through them. We've gone through Johnson's relationship. I think it's pretty clear, right? Well, let's go through Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky ran guns to Palestine when it was illegal. He used a bank in Switzerland to launder drug profits that was run by a Mossad guy. And it was the same bank. Yes, this is history, guys. See, I feel that the assassination community is either just sort of didn't notice or somebody has made it very clear to them, don't mention Israel. Because I'm not a professional assassination research fellow, so nobody publishes my books. I had to self-publish these books. I don't think I'm going to get invited to any conferences. Luckily, thanks to the podcasting world, I've been on a few podcasts, but even there, it's been tough sledding. I have a feeling the word's gotten out. If you mention Israel, no more book contracts, no more appearances at the conferences, you're out. Because these things are everywhere you look. I mean, we could talk all year about some of this stuff, right? So in addition to, so there was a bank in Switzerland, and it was the bank that Israel used to acquire weapons, right? It was sort of like, a secret bank, because they were buying a lot of weapons illegally, right? And Meyer Lansky just coincidentally had an affiliation with that bank as well, and it happened just coincidentally to have been founded by a guy that was involved with the Mossad. Now, I understand Meyer Lansky's feelings because he's a Jewish man. He was a Jewish man. And we always have to remember the real, very real trauma that took place after World War II and during World War II. It was horrific. And so we have to remember that. And so when he was shipping weapons to Palestine, he's kind of like an Irish guy chipping in for money to the IRA in a Boston bar. I get that. So I think of all the people involved in this, Meyer Lansky was probably the least nefarious. But he did absolutely have connections to the Zionists. He also had connections to the assassination. Now, here's a very weird thing about assassination research. They always talk about Trafficante and Marcello and all these fellows and Roselli. They never talk about Meyer Lansky. And this is very strange because when you hear the word organized crime, he and Lucky Luciano literally put the word organized into organized crime. They are literally the two guys that got all the mobsters together during Prohibition and said, look, guys, we're shooting each other. We're hijacking each other's beer trucks. This is crazy. There's plenty of money. And he's the guy that worked out the system of you get Buffalo, you get Cleveland, you get Tampa. He worked that out. Right? So he put the organized and organized crime. He was also called the mob's accountant, which is silly. He was also called the mob's banker, which is a little closer to the truth. But what he was the master of money laundering for the entire U.S. organized crime edifice. You know, they were very good at stealing and selling drugs and all the other stuff they did. They weren't very good at money, which is why Al Capone ended up in jail. Right? They didn't get him on crime. They got him on failing to file his taxes properly. So that put the fear of God in the entire mafia structure. And they looked to Meyer Lansky, who was a brilliant man, to handle all that money laundering. So in the world of organized crime, there were all the godfathers of the different families who each had their own district. But then there was Meyer Lansky, who made sure that nobody went to jail because he handled all the money. So when you say that organized crime was involved in killing Kennedy and you don't mention Meyer Lansky, how do you do that? How do you leave him out? So that's another leg. Now here's the big leg. Here's the amazing leg. People throw this name around, but they never dig deep. And once you start digging, it is mind-boggling. James Jesus Angleton. Okay.
James Jesus Angleton. Yes. Okay.
People know that name. They're like, what did that guy do? You know? All right. Let me tell you what he did.
Right. Well, in my research on the USS Liberty and all of that, this is one dastardly fellow. So go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, even yesterday I was learning new things about him. It's unbelievable. All the things that he did. All right. So first we have to ask, well, what was his job? So his job was director of counterintelligence for the CIA. What is counterintelligence? Well, basically it's spying on the spies, right? So you want to see what the other guys are up to. You want to prevent the other guys from seeing what you're up to. When you're running covert operations, you want to have security around them so that you can keep the planning secret, the execution secret, and the cover-up secret forever. So that he's the man for that. Okay. So that's what counterintelligence is, guys. Now, why wasn't he brought to the Warren Commission? Nobody interviewed him. This is going to blow your mind. I only learned this a week ago. And I learned this when I asked, who's the current head of counterintelligence? Guys, if you Google that, you'll be told that's classified information. The head of counterintelligence is not a public figure. He is a classified person. Okay? And when the Kennedys got shot, he was known obviously to insiders. If you worked for the CIA, if you were really knowledgeable, you kind of knew who he was. That position was classified. That's why he never had to appear in front of anybody until later in his career. So imagine the guy at the center of the CIA, whose job it is to keep everything the CIA does secret, whose identity was not public during the time of the Kennedy assassinations, was James Jesus Angleton. So maybe he had something to do with it. Let's talk about his Israeli connections. They are mind-boggling. First of all, just a little bit about his background, because it's very helpful. His father was an industrialist who bought the franchise for National Cash Register in fascist Italy. So young James grew up in fascist Italy in a fascist-friendly household, because believe me, you could not do business in Italy during the fascist era unless you were a happy fascist. Okay? Simultaneous with that, and this is another piece of history nobody knows, though it's history, it's indisputable, the Zionists really liked the Italian fascists. And the Italian fascists really liked the Zionists. Okay? Now, why did the Zionists like the Italian fascists? They liked the way Mussolini bombed the civilians in Ethiopia and dropped chemical weapons on them. They thought that's the right way to deal in the Middle East when you have to get something done. So they actually went to Italy en masse and befriended the Italian fascists. Mussolini said nice things about them. Mussolini let them set up a military training camp adjacent to his, basically Annapolis, their version of Annapolis. And there were Italian special forces people training the Zionists in military operations during the 30s. It was routine to call oneself a fascist Zionist proudly in the 1930s. Obviously, they dropped that because it's not a very nice thing to say anymore. But in the 30s, it was okay to be a Zionist, a fascist Zionist. Okay, so in that milieu, young James Jesus Angleton grew up. All right, then he got into the OSS, and in the OSS, he was sent to Italy because he spoke Italian fluently, and he knew everybody because when he was a kid, everybody was coming to his rich dad's house. He became the head of OSS operations in Italy after World War II. And what did he do? You heard about the rat line? Taking fascists and Nazis out of Europe with the help of the Vatican. Guess who ran that? Young James Jesus Angleton, OSS officer. Then they turned him into then the CIA came into being, and he was in charge of CIA covert operations and counterintelligence in Italy. You ever heard of Richard Galen, the Nazi intelligence chief of Eastern Europe, who covered the east of part of Europe, who joined the CIA? James Jesus Angleton was part of that. What else did James Jesus Angleton do as a young man? Well, it was illegal to send weapons to to Palestine. It was a crime in the United States. And of course, Meyer Lansky didn't care. He just shipped them. Guess who else shipped American weapons to Palestine? James Jesus Angleton. The way he got around it, and he's a very diabolical genius, man. This guy was way too smart. And what he did was when you have a war, you got to send a lot of stuff over, right? To Italy, right? It's sitting there. The war is over. What do you do with it? Do you send it back to the United States? Nope. James Jesus Angleton shipped it to Palestine. Now the Mossad's being formed. We all know about the Mossad, these arch, genius intelligence guys. Who helped form the Mossad? Who helped train them? James Jesus Angleton. He had a relationship with the Mossad that was as deep as anything could ever go. And there's more. He set up with Allen Dulles the following relationship, that he alone would be the only person that would communicate with the Mossad on behalf of the CIA. He controlled that line of communication throughout his entire career. Let's talk about the length of his career. He was head of counterintelligence for 20 plus years. All right, so we're getting into J. Edgar Hoover territory or Anthony Fauci territory. He owned the job. He survived 5 different CIA directors. They came and went, they came and went, they came and went. He sat in his seat as counterintelligence director, who also had this very unique relationship with the state of Israel. And he's so beloved by the state of Israel that they created a memorial forest to him near Jerusalem.
Really?
Okay, so I know it's mind-boggling. This is history, guys, though. I got to tell you, there's not a shred of this that can be disputed.
Right.
So if we look at the people who are reputed to have been involved in the killing of Kennedy, we've got LBJ, clearly a Zionist supporter. We got Meyer Lansky, sympathetic to Israel. I think he was probably the best of all of them, the nicest, the most decent of all of them. The mob guy was the most decent. His idea was, hey, terrible things happen to the Jewish people. We got to help Israel. That's kind of the level that his mentality was. And then the third guy, we have James Jesus Angleton, I mean, can you be more closer to Israel, the Mossad, and Zionist extremism than James Jesus Angleton? I don't know how it's possible. And I've only given you a few of the really the intersections
Yeah.
between these guys. But now let's get to there was an organization that was created called ZD Rifle. ZD Rifle, and people that are deep into the assassination stuff know what that is. Basically, it was the CIA working with the mob to create a hit team to kill Castro. ZD Rifle. Guess who was put in charge of making sure the ZD Rifle operation was kept super hyper secret? James Jesus Angleton. Okay, who was who was part of ZD Rifle? Roselli, Trafficante, Giancana, right? They were on the list. They were on a list called literally the shooters list. And this was in Angleton's files. And the plan was, and I don't think those guys were going to do the actual shooting, but they were going to arrange to find the shooters for Castro. And the deal was those were the guys that were going to kill Castro. And all the operations for ZD Rifle were handled by James G. Angleton. Historical fact, indisputable. Now, where we get into speculation, a lot of scholars in the assassination world believe that it was a what do you call it? Sleight of hand. In other words, on the surface they were designing a team to kill Castro, and what they were really doing was designing a team to kill Kennedy. Now, what's interesting is that eventually the Congress got wise to this, and later, way too late, and said, we need a hearing. We need a new hearing about the assassination. They wanted to talk to Roselli. They wanted to talk to Trafficante. They wanted to talk to Giancana. They never talked to them. Why? Roselli ended up in an oil drum cut into pieces. Somebody killed Giancana. Somebody killed Trafficante survived, though. Trafficante survived. But there was another fellow, and unfortunately I'm blanking his name, but there was a Nicoletti. Guy named Nicoletti, who was a Chicago strong-arm killer, and he was also on the shooters list. It was literally called the shooters list, and he also ended up dying before he could testify. So James Jesus Angleton controlled the ZD Rifle files. Now, we should talk about the Kennedy files, right? The assassination files. And I feel those are the biggest red herring in the history of the world. Because if you actually look at open source material and you look at the indisputable history, nothing that I'm talking about here can be disputed by any historian. It's all documented, usually in a silo somewhere. This guy's an expert on this and this guy's an expert on this. If you put it all together, you start to see all these pieces coming into play. Now, it gets even better. Remember, counterintelligence is not just keeping the planning secret and keeping the operation secret. It's keeping it secret forever. That's the cover-up guy. Remember JFK's supposed girlfriend who was shot in Washington, D.C., near the canal in Georgetown? Okay. Her husband was a colleague of James Jesus Angleton. They were close colleagues in the CIA, and the man and the woman divorced, and so she was living on her own. But he still loved her. He still cared about her, And the murder was just bizarre. She's shot, no reason, no assault, no robbery. Some guy just shot him. They arrested some poor fellow, said he did it, and they had to let him go. Nobody knows who killed this woman, except that she was going to talk about what she knew about the assassination. The husband of this woman, the ex-husband of this woman, a CIA dude, not some freak, guy, making stuff up, said James Jesus Angleton broke into her apartment and stole her diary after she was killed. This is a CIA man saying this. Yeah. Counterintelligence.
I heard that part.
I know. It's even better. Mexico City was very, very important to the Kennedy assassination, right? Supposedly Oswald was down there. He was talking with the Russians, there was, and then we got to talk about Oswald. Oh my God, the Oswald connections are crazy. But in any event, the guy that was head station chief of Mexico City during the assassination retired, and he had some second thoughts about the whole situation that went on. And he was writing a memoir. and he was starting to get loose-lipped. He died, probably a natural death, I hope. Guess who personally got on a plane, flew to Mexico City, and badgered the wife? And this is her own testimony and her son's testimony. Personally badgered the wife of this man, this former CIA chief of Mexico City, to go into his private office, get into his safe, take every copy of that memoir and remove his files and fly them back to the United States. James Jesus Angleton. Okay? Now, I got to ask again, I'm no professional scholar of the assassinations, but I did have a little time to look into some stuff. How is it possible that I'm the one telling you this in 2025? That I didn't know any of this stuff. And then we got to go back to the fact that Angleton was a close friend of the Zionists. And the whole purpose of, by the way, the appeal of Zionism in Israel was anti-communism, right? They were going to be our bulwark against communism in the Middle East.
Right.
Yep. So now we got to talk about Oswald. Guess who ordered Oswald's letters to be read in 1959? Not after the assassination, in 1959, James Jesus Angleton. Yeah, this is history.
So?
Well, because he had run off to Russia, and they wanted all his correspondence opened and read. Okay, so that happened. Guess who James Jesus Angleton, and I'm going to blank on the name. I'm sorry. There's so much to this. It's hard to keep it all in my head. Ephron. He tasked a man named Ephron with actually reading Oswald's mail starting in 1959. It was known that, well, it didn't become known that the CIA was reading Oswald's pre-assassination mail until relatively recently. That came out in one of the files, a couple of years ago. But what they kept secret until very, 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 very recently was the identity of the man reading the mail. His name was Ephron. He was an attorney. He supposedly specialized in, trade law, and he had to go to Israel all the time from Washington, D.C., back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That was his life, going back and forth between Israel and Washington, D.C. He ended up retiring in Israel, and he ended up writing a book on the glorious history of spying in the Jewish world. But anyway, so many things here. Angleton tasked this man with reading Oswald's mail starting in 1959. There's more. He tasked this man with being his personal spy at the Warren Commission hearings. Okay, remember, Angleton didn't show his face at the hearings because his identity was classified. And by the way, remember when Kennedy fired Dulles and Bissell and all these guys? Okay, he didn't fire Angleton. Angleton stayed in his role, right? Because his position was classified. And that's why he didn't get involved have to get involved in the Warren Commission. But he sent Ephron to sit in the room when Oswald's wife was being interrogated. And the cover was, Ephron's a brilliant linguist. He knows Russian. He knows fake Hebrew. I call it fake Hebrew because there's original Hebrew, and the stuff that they speak in Israel is a made-up language, believe it or not. You can ask a linguist. It's not the real original language. But anyway, so that's another weird thing going on. So, and then let me just cap this with the most amazing thing of all. He had an incredible office. There was a lock just to get into the office. There was a lock to get into his inner office. I mean, I'm not talking about lock. I'm talking about like safe-like, right? There was a lock to get into his inner office, and then in his inner office there were safes too. Okay, he was finally forced out. I think it was 70. I should know this, but I think it was 74, because he had become a raging alcoholic, and he was basically losing his mind, and he was causing so many problems that they had to get rid of him. He was also revealed to have been running biggest surveillance program on American citizens up to that point in human history. That came out in the New York Times. Yeah, man. New York Times front page article. Seymour Hersh revealed it. He's the guy that broke the story. But what's amazing is there the picture of 3 CIA guys on the front page of the New York Times. No picture of Angleton. It was his deal. And he's mentioned, I think, on like the 72nd paragraph, buried. He's in there somewhere, but they didn't bother to mention him. But he was driven out. Now, here's where it gets truly crazy. They bring in a new director of counterintelligence. And he comes to work 9 to 5. It's all good. What was going on from 5 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the morning for, I think it was 11 or 12 days straight? Angleton's trusted people were burning files. Okay? It's estimated, again, this is history, folks, that he had 150 feet of file space. All right? So that's half a football field. Wow. And it's estimated that 95% of his files were burned in that 11 or 12-day period. And only 5% of his files remain. So, and I want to emphasize to everybody, check every single fact that I've given you. You may have to dig a little bit, but you'll find everything I'm saying is history, open source history. We don't need the hidden secret files that they've been, jerking us around with for the last 62 years. We've got enough to know who did this and who all the players were. Now, if we take this full circle, I'm not saying that Israel killed Kennedy, but I'm saying they were absolutely one of the grand beneficiaries of him being killed. There were no tears shed among official Israel when Kennedy one died, and then the brother died too. And it looks like the same cast of characters were involved in killing the brother for very similar reasons. He was not a gun-ho. And we got, if I might take this very important thing, we don't understand who the Kennedys were. Their real identity has been completely covered over. Let's get right to it. Joseph Kennedy at one point was the 5th richest man in the United States. This was a man of incredible power. He was an Irishman. His family grew up poor. He knew what it was like to have somebody's heel on your neck. And he put his 2 sons in, he put his son in the White House. And let's face it, as bright as those 2 men were, they never would have made it to the White House without their father's backing. It just never would have happened. He wanted to put a boy in the White House, one of his boys in the White House. So he wanted Joseph, his oldest, to go, and it didn't work. So John stepped up and went in. Why did Joseph Kennedy want to do that? Well, let's get into some. If we look at what John Kennedy did when he was a young senator, and there was no political gain at all anywhere, nationally or certainly in Massachusetts, he got on the Senate floor and said, look, the French are beating up on the people in Indochina, and we're part of it. We should get out of it. This was a long speech. Historical record can't be denied. He also gave a second speech. The French were also messing around in Algeria. They did terrible things in Algeria. He gave a speech, 5,000 words. Senator, young man, Massachusetts, no political gain. In fact, it cost him politically. And he said, we should not be supporting the French oppression in Algeria. The Algerians were fighting for their independence. We should not be supporting this. The Kennedys were possibly the only people ever in the White House who were fully economically independent. They did not have to dance to anybody else's tune. And they were America first, as they should have been, because that's their job. But they were also fairness to the rest of the world. Let's survive by strength, and let's survive by friendship. We've never really had a president like that before or after. They've all had, slight financial, Abraham Lincoln, a very, great man. No one ever asked how he made his living. He was a high-powered attorney for the railroad companies. So he always had to have an eye. And if you look at American history, he was very friendly to the railroad companies. Okay, George Washington, God bless him, the greatest hero, unbelievable. We could sing his praises forever. He owned a ton of land in the Western, what was then called the West. And he had reason to do certain developmental things governmentally. So, but the Kennedys, and I don't mean to disparage them at all, but I want to just contrast. The Kennedys had a clean slate. and they wanted to do the right thing. And one of the right
Can I
things was to
show?
keep Israel from getting the nuclear bomb.
Yeah, to keep Israel from getting the nuclear bomb. Also, to be fair to Algeria, I want to play something here. We have a video that you were kind enough to share. I've never seen this video before. I just want to play it, and I want our audience to guess what they're seeing here. This is probably, a highly suppressed video. So I'm just going to play this for, a few seconds here or so our audience can see it. And then I want you to explain to our audience what we're seeing here. Take a look. I didn't know what it was. Looks like it's from the 1960s. I don't know what exactly I'm looking at here, but it looks like a full. Well, you tell me. I don't know what this is.
Okay, well, it's October. Let's put it in time. It's October 1962. And I want to ask your viewers, have they ever seen a more lavish reception at the White House ever? Have they ever seen? I mean, they let out everything. They had color guards from all the different branches of the military, not three guys with a flag. They had 20 guys from each military operation, there with their flags. They had generals. They had cabinet members. Jackie was there. I don't know if you noticed, Jackie was behind the bushes with John John. He was making a very powerful statement. Who was he celebrating? He was celebrating the newly elected president of the newly independent state of Algeria, an Arab-speaking country. I mean, wow. And what was the message he was sending? He was sending many messages. Number one, here's the deal, guys. We're the U.S., we're strong, but we want to work with you, and we celebrate your independence. We want you to be independent. We want you to be free. How many presidents have done anything like that before or since? He was also sending a message to the U.S. military. And he was a military man. Kennedy, he was a combat veteran. And he knew how the things work. And he wanted to send a message to the U.S. military. Hey, guys, all these coups, these invasions and all this stuff that we're involved in, our heel on the neck of the developing world, it's over. Okay? These people are our brothers. We're going to lift them up. We're going to encourage them. We're going to spread liberty around the world. That was his message. And that was October 1962. Now, the reason nobody's ever heard of this is that the very next week, excuse me, not the very next week, the very next day, the CIA came to him and said, oh, you two planes, we discovered weapons in Cuba, and the Cuban Missile Crisis began. So they absolutely neutralized any press coverage that would have been, that president, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but he was on a tour. He went to Canada. He was in the United States. A big deal was being made of the independence of Algeria. And all that consciousness got wiped out because we went right into the missile crisis. Guess who ran security for the U2 program? James Jesus Angleton. There's nothing this guy didn't have his hands on. Now, in terms of, just so people understand Algeria, and it's relevant to today's news in Gaza. The French invaded Algeria in 1830. They killed 1/3 of the population in that first wave of conquest, 1/3. And then they just subjugated the place. And then in the 50s, the Algerians rose up and started a revolution. And it was brutal. Guess who helped? The Israelis. They provided intelligence because the Israelis have really great intelligence on all things Middle Eastern. They have a lot of Arabic speakers, and they just kind of know what's going on. So they provided intelligence to assist the Algerians in slaughtering Algerian civilians. There's an estimate that about 1 million Algerian civilians were murdered during the course of that uprising. And they burned their agricultural fields, they burned their villages, they put people in concentration camps. And that's when young John F. Kennedy got on the floor of the US Senate and said, "This is wrong. Why are we supporting this? This is not helping anybody. This is bad for France. This is bad for everybody." So when Kennedy became president, what did he do? As soon as that country was free, de Gaulle said, "Hey, we're out. This is wrong." He realized it was wrong too. And by the way, de Gaulle almost they tried to kill him. After he cut Algeria loose, a group of right-wing people who were pro-domination of Algeria tried to kill de Gaulle. But in any event, as soon as freedom rung, the bells of freedom were ringing in Algeria, and they elected their first president. The first thing Kennedy did was invite him to come for this lavish reception to send a message to the world. And about a year and a month later, he was dead.
So in the book, I mean, a lot of really interesting documents. I thought one of the most interesting documents, though, was this letter from JFK as a student, to his father, to Joe Kennedy, on his trip to Palestine, which I never knew that JFK had gone to Palestine. Yeah. The letter is revealing, and he specifically says in the letter, the idea, it theoretically presents a good solution, but it just won't work. What is he talking? What is he telling his father won't work in his experience by being in Palestine?
Well, the idea that it could be an ethno-state. It's like, this doesn't work. This is a bad idea. This is a young man, a college student, traveling the world. He had the ability to do that because his father was one of the richest men in the world, and he visited Jerusalem. He was on the ground there. He also visited, I believe, he visited Indochina, but he did a world tour basically to see what was going on, and he wrote his father that letter, and he could see that this was not going to end well.
Right.
And
there wouldn't be a brilliant cohabitation with Palestinians and Jews.
Well, there could have been if it wasn't set up as an ethno-state. I mean, I think everyone knows that if you are not the right kind of person in Israel, even if you're a citizen, you're treated very badly. You don't have the same rights as somebody who's part of the ethnic group.
This comes on the heels of another letter, and I mentioned at the beginning, Albert Einstein.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we don't hear more about this, but I think it's fascinating, this second letter that Albert Einstein published. Can you walk us through what a Jewish Albert Einstein was warning all of us about Israel? Can you walk us through that and how this is all tied together?
He was aware that there were Zionist extremist groups in Israel and in Palestine. And he was aware that they were dangerous, that they had fascist tendencies. He pointed out a massacre that took place, of Palestinian civilians in a village. He expressed his sorrow and his grief and his outrage on behalf of himself and other Jewish Americans. This goes back to I forget the date on that letter, but this is an old letter. It goes back to the 40s. And he wrote it to the New York Times, and the New York Times published it. He was actually complaining. I think it was Menachem Begin. I can't remember which guy, but it was one of those guys. He was like, "Don't let this guy in the U.S. Don't let him speak. Don't honor him. This guy's a criminal. He's a terrorist. He's a fascist. He's doing bad things."
It would be amazing to think, what would Albert Einstein, Jewish Americans, say about Netanyahu today?
Oh. Well, we can look at the hundreds of thousands and millions of Jewish Americans and Jews all around the world that are horrified at what's going on, that are in the streets daily. I mean, it's the leaders outside of Palestine itself, who are fighting on behalf of stopping the genocide, are largely Jewish people. So the crazy idea that, if you're a Jewish person, you are automatically lockstep with everything Israel does, no matter what. That's not true. That's not true at all. You can go on
Right.
YouTube and find a Jewish person after Jewish person that's spending their every day of their life trying to stop the genocide.
The other thing I saw, with this letter to his father, but JFK was basically also saying about Britain that, you know, Britain's, carving up of Palestine and basically giving that land to the Jews. His position, if I'm not mistaken, was this is not Britain's
It's not Britain's land to give.
right. Why is Britain deciding where they're going to put a country of Israel? I mean,
Well,
obviously, oil
we're
rights,
we're
natural gas rights, British petroleum off the coast of Palestine. So of course they have massive British interests in making money off of that, right?
well, and of course, it was a British. It's really it goes beyond. Behind the country are the banks. The huge financial interests. And I believe at the bottom, Angleton wanted, just to take this back to Angleton for a second, then back to the British. And by the way, Angleton and the British were like this. I mean,
Right.
the OSS was trained by the British in spycraft. Angleton personally was trained by the British in spycraft. He was what do you call it, an Anglophile, right? And there were a lot of people at the very top of the CIA that were Anglophiles. They believed, England was, the promised land or whatever. So England wanted to have, well, if we look at the importance of that part of the world, it is so strategically important. Even before oil was discovered, basically it's the bridge between East and West, between Europe and Asia. If you want to control the world, you've got to control the passage between Asia and Europe, and that happens to be the Middle East. That's why they put that canal in. The English and the French got together, put a canal through Egypt, the Suez Canal, which was funded, by the way, by bankers, obviously, the Rothschild Bank. Now, people say, oh, you must be anti-Semitic because you're talking about the Rothschilds. I don't care if the Rothschilds were Tibetan or Bolivian it doesn't matter. They're just a big moneyed interest. And if I could talk about the Rothschilds just for a second, people don't grasp how much is how much, when it comes to money. Like, I might think, I don't want to open a restaurant, but let's say I might want to open a restaurant. So I save some money and I rent a space and I hire some people, The Rothschilds had money that on the scale that they terraformed entire countries, right? For example, this is a sidebar, but it really helps understand why we're in the pickle we're in now. I was in Guatemala and I was talking with a human rights attorney in a city called Chela, which was the center of the Guatemalan coffee industry. And he said, oh, the Rothschilds built the Guatemalan coffee industry. And he explained it to me. They had an agent, and this will all make sense. I know it seems like I'm taking us far afield, but you'll see. They had agents all over the world looking for where to put their money, right? They're like loan sharks. Loan sharks are always looking like, I got to place this money on the street, right? Well, on that scale, they have the same problems. They had agents all over the world looking for business opportunities. And they discovered that Guatemala, this relatively obscure country at the time, had a lot of land that was perfect for growing coffee. They knew America was a big coffee drinker, and previously they were getting their coffee from, Brazil. And they went in with the equivalent of billions of dollars, and they rounded up all the local landowners and they loaned them the money to grow coffee. They brought over the trees, they brought over the agricultural men, they built the railroads, they built the warehouses, they built the docks. That's Rothschild thinking. Got you? And so now let's look at Israel. The Rothschilds sat back and said, there's that Middle East thing. We really need to control it. And none of our people are there. And then the Zionists came along and they thought, they kind of look like us. They act like us. They think like us. Why don't we bankroll them? And the Rothschilds, this is history, Rothschild, they bankrolled the original years of Zionist immigration to Israel. So basically, the way a gangster, let's think about gangsters. And because, everybody talks about the deep state. I call it the real state. It's the real state. And the real state are gangsters. And they think exactly the same. So let's say you're a gangster and you want to deal crack in a bad neighborhood. You don't personally go to the bad neighborhood and take a corner up and start slinging crack. You find some hoodlums to do it for you. And that's the way the banking interests looked at the Middle East. We don't want to actually be in Palestine, but these guys, I think we can control them. Let's send them to Palestine to bust heads for us, which they did. Because let's go back to that Suez Canal. The English, you'll see the loop where this is connected. And this is how Israel got its nuclear weapons. So this is why I'm bringing it up. So the Rothschilds, being the intelligent, big vision people, deep pockets people they were, kickstarted the financing of the Suez Canal. Right? The French were involved too. In the 50s, Nasser in Egypt said, hey, you know what? That canal running through our country, we're going to give you a check. It's ours now because it's running through our country. Now, did England invade Egypt when they did that? No. Did France invade Egypt when they expropriated the canal? No. Israel attacked Egypt. Right? So that's a sign very early on that Israel was put in place to be the attack dog, the thug for large banking interests in the Middle East. And now France was so happy and pleased with what the Zionists did in Egypt. What did they do? They said, we're going to help you develop nuclear technology. And it was a relationship of equals because the Israelis had a lot of great scientists. The French nuclear weapons program and the Israeli nuclear weapons program developed at the same time. In fact, there were Israeli scientists in Algeria. We're going to go back to Algeria. They did open air testing in Algeria of their bombs, of their first nuclear weapons, France did. And there were Israeli scientists there contributing to the French nuclear effort. And then the French, in turn, contributed equipment, money, and so on to the Israeli nuclear effort. And then and going back to James Jesus Angleton, he apparently had some involvement in that disappearing plutonium that ended up in Israel because a few years later, when they wanted to investigate, I think it was Nixon wanted to investigate, well, how the heck did they get that stuff? And what happened to the plutonium that was in Pennsylvania? Angleton said to Nixon, don't look into that. It's just going to stir things up. Do you see how all this is woven together?
Yeah. I guess.
And I have to, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I have to ask, it's 2025. I'm not a professional assassination researcher. I've listened to them all for years. I've read their books. I've listened to the podcasts. How did they miss this stuff? It's just a question.
It's remarkable. Would you say, I mean, I encourage everyone to read the book, but would you say, what do you think the biggest smoking gun here is to say that Israel was definitely involved in the assassinations of both JFK and RFK?
Two things. Number one, they benefited tremendously. Number two, they had intimate relations with all the people we consider the players. That would be organized crime. That would be the CIA. And that would be LBJ. So is there a smoking gun? I mean, here's the way I look at it. Let's say you're in a room with 10 dogs, right? And the lights go out. And one of those dogs bites you. The lights go back on. And all the dogs are sitting there looking totally innocent. There's no evidence. There's no forensic evidence. There's no witnesses. There's no videotape. We don't know who bit me. But we do know we can find out who bit you. We measure the bite on your leg and we measure the jaws of all the dogs. And we're going to find that one set of jaws fits that bite on your leg 100% seamlessly.
Right.
So I'm not saying Israel did it. I'm saying they had a lot of ways to benefit, and they were deeply involved with all the players. And they've done their best to make sure, and I'm going to put this out there and people can make up their own mind. We've had an assassination research community who've done great work for many decades. Why have they never mentioned any of the things that I've talked about in this conversation?
Right. Why is it left out of the conversation? Even when RFK Jr. himself is interviewed about this. It's very curious how this part of the story is left out of a lot of the discussions.
Well, and and one of the other threads that got me wondering is the guy that killed his father, Sirhan. That was obviously an MK Ultra operation. He was, everybody that's ever examined him, who's knowledgeable, knowledgeable people who've examined him, doctors, professors, say this is the most hypnotizable guy that ever lived. We've never seen anything like this. You tell this guy to, stand on his head, he just stands on his head. MK Ultra, and I'm sure everybody knows about the MK Ultra program. It did a lot of different. By the way, who worked with Richard Helms to make sure the MK Ultra program was operated covertly? James Jesus Angleton. And by the way, the MK Ultra files, 99% of them were destroyed illegally. The only reason we even know there was an MK Ultra program is they missed some of the financial records. Some of the financial records were in a totally different place. And we still don't know exactly all that MK Ultra did, but we know it existed and we know some of its operations. But its goal, one of its goals was to create programmable assassins. And not necessarily guys that, pulled the trigger, but guys that could be put in place and act as patsies. And it's obvious, I think, to everybody that Sirhan was a patsy. And I think if people that are knowledgeable know that this guy was seriously mind controlled. We have to ask, given that we know MK Ultra had a big operation and they had a huge inventory of patsies, they could have used anybody. Why did they pick a Palestinian patsy? And then the other question is, they found, I don't know if you know, but they found in his pocket that night a news clipping from, I think, a month earlier, which was about RFK Sr. Approving some weapons being sent to Israel. Who clips something and walks around with it in their pocket for a month? You know what I mean? It's just a weird thing. So I am wondering if the reason they picked a Palestinian, and by the way, Kennedy didn't die instantly. So there were actually headlines in newspapers that said Kennedy, in the hospital, shot by an anti-Semitic Palestinian. It reminds me of 9/11. Remember 9/11? And somebody slipped in an archive video of Palestinians celebrating. Do you remember that?
Right.
Yeah. And you know this business very well. How on earth did that piece of video get on the air while the buildings were still burning? Somebody had to go, think about it, right? Somebody had to go through the archive and find it and screen it. And then the news director had to get it. And then he had to tell the newsreader. And yet that thing was on in seconds. So we know that film was ready to go. They were trying to hang the Palestinians on 9/11, frame them, right? And they were trying to frame a Palestinian for killing RFK. And he was an MK Ultra guy, no question. And it just happened that James Jesus Angleton was the guy in charge of controlling all the secrets for MK Ultra. So it just goes on and on and on. But behind it all are these huge money interests, and they look at the world as their personal chessboard, and they want to play all kinds of games, and they control the politicians, and they insert their guys like James Jesus Angleton and people like that to run the world secretly, operate the world secretly, and they just do what they do, and they usually do it in the shadows. But I think maybe with this show, because I've never been able to say so much on a podcast before, never been given the opportunity. Maybe with this show, we're going to crack this open, and people are going to start looking into these facts. First, verify them, and then talk them up.
I hope so. And I hope people will read your book because, again, no publishers will touch this. You had to self-publish this. Go out, everyone go and buy a copy of this. JFK and RFK's Secret Battle Against Zionist Extremism. Read Ken's book. It's fascinating. Thank you for the incredible research. We could talk for hours about this. we just barely scratched the surface of all of this, if you can believe that. So, Ken, great work on this. Thank you so much for all of this and all of your research and all of your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for creating this great outlet so that people can share what they've learned.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ken.